This is the Local Real Estate Developer Podcast, where we share the stories of locals across the country who took that empty lot or that old building and turned it into something awesome that their community needs. I'm Kristi Kandel, and I've been a real estate developer my entire career. My co-host Raphael is a commercial broker, and together we're sharing the stories of locals making a huge impact on their communities. And what we've learned is you don't need millions in the bank or decades of experience to get started. You just need the confidence, tools, and the right people around you. This podcast is your chance to gain the confidence to get in the game, because real estate development isn't just for the insiders anymore. It's for people like you too. Welcome to the Local Real Estate Developer Podcast. I'm your co-host, Kristi Kandel. I'm a developer, investor, and I teach locals how to become real estate developers in their own backyard. And I'm joined today with my co-host, Raphael.
Hey, Kristi, always great seeing you. My name is Raphael. I'm a commercial broker and investor located here in Louisville, Kentucky. And today we have a phenomenal guest, Marc. I don't remember exactly how we connected. I believe it was through Instagram. A few years ago, we just got connected. I had a previous podcast that I had him on, and we talked a little bit about his background, his story. And one of the reasons why we wanted to invite him on our podcast today is because he's been taking on a hotel development project in Puerto Rico. And I thought it would be a great way for us to learn a little bit more about some of the nuances of that type of project. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interesting insights we garner from the conversation. So, Marc, it's always great seeing you.
Appreciate you both having me on. Yeah, this is a real pleasure to speak with you again.
Yeah, no, the pleasure's all ours. But I guess for those who don't know about you, why don't you go ahead and share a little bit about your background and what got you into the real estate space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm one of those people who started off in a regular W-2 job working in corporate America. My field was working on Wall Street my entire career. So graduated school, started working on Wall Street, worked my way from kind of back office roles to eventually front office roles. And all throughout that time, I had kind of been self-studying or self-educating on asset ownership, on investing, what it takes to build up a portfolio and to have your portfolio support your quality of life and your cost of living. And so, I arrived upon the Little Purple Bible, as many call it, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It talked about the merits of investing in real estate. And so I started to dig in, started to talk to people that I knew that had invested in real estate and caught the bug from there. And so around 2016 is when I finally pulled the trigger and started to buy my own place. First, it was just a house hack. I think that's a starting point for a lot of people. And from there, it kind of snowballed. I bought another place the following year, and it became a thing where every year I was trying to see if I could buy at least one or two properties, and learned a ton along the way. Started off in really condos in the Northeast because that was the most attainable. And then, it snowballed from there into small multifamily, eventually larger multifamily through joint ventures and syndications, and then eventually now more recently into hospitality.
That's awesome. Yeah, and that's a story, a board that I've heard from a lot of people, where you start off with a condo or a house that you rent out rooms to, and I started out with a fourplex. I bought a fourplex and ran out the other units, and so it's a very attainable way for people to get into owning real estate because you can qualify for the residential financing, and if you do the house hack piece, you eliminate the mortgage, thus you compound your ability to potentially purchase in the future. So that's a really smart way to approach the process of getting into investing, especially while you're retaining your job, which is great.
Absolutely. I think getting started while you have a job would actually be a huge level of support. I mean, as we all know, getting started in real estate, you're going to make mistakes. It's not a matter of if, it's just when. And so having that safety net of that additional income coming in, and hopefully you're managing your finances, you're saving more than you're spending. Having that is kind of a safety net for occasional surprises that pop up with real estate investment. So I was able to kind of get started at a low level in terms of the risks and issues that I faced were manageable, and then kind of scaled as my comfort level went up.
I absolutely love that, because so many times people will go, real estate, it's all risky, and development, it's risky. And it's like, yeah, but you can take calculated steps to where you're mitigating your risk. You're learning early on smaller projects to where if something does go sideways, it will cost you, but it doesn't have to wipe you completely out, which is great. Awesome. So you got started into investing. You went into syndications. Were you a limited partner or general partner on those?
I've done both. So I think my first few investments were, they were LPs. And my thought process there was I will learn while I earn, hopefully. If the deal goes well, I'll be compensated. And then I'll also be able to have access directly to a general partner. And in my case, I tried to find general partners that I could learn from and that were open to teaching throughout the process. And I was fortunate to be a part of a couple of masterminds at that time where the people running those masterminds were really venerable people, had a ton of experience. And so I was able to kind of do that for a couple of years before I finally decided, okay, I've got what it takes now to go out and raise capital for my projects.
That's awesome. So what was that jump to raising money? Because I think that's another piece of the puzzle that a lot of people have questions about is that, how do you get the funds to take down some of these projects? Can you kind of talk a little bit about how you were able to, leverage your network so that you could start taking on larger projects?
Totally. I think part of my, early success with that, it didn't come easy. I think, I don't come from a family that has tons and tons of money set aside for real estate. And frankly, I don't really even have anybody in my family that had invested in real estate. So it was something new for me. But I think some of my early successes with raising capital just came from the fact that I was very public about what I was doing with my friends and family. I certainly wasn't posting on social media or anything like that, but I was telling people, okay, this is spending my weekend. This is what I'm putting my time and energy into. And so it kind of helped in terms of people getting a perception of Marc as the finance guy or friend or whatever it was to Marc, who's now doing real estate. And so I think bringing people along in your journey early is really, really helpful. If you feel comfortable posting about it, absolutely go that route. Just the more that people know that what you're doing and associate you with real estate, I think the easier those conversations will become.
That's true. So really it's just making sure everyone knows what you do and you constantly talk about it and give people an opportunity to potentially team up to take down some of these projects if in fact there's interest there. So that's great.
Exactly.
So you talk about a little bit of an evolution into getting into larger projects. You start off with condos in the Northeast, you evolve to small multifamily, and I'm assuming a lot of these projects you're taking on yourself. Then you start getting into a limited partnership role, which would mean you'd put up some capital in a larger fund, and ultimately they purchase property, and over time you would get compensated either with cash flow, and if they just sell in the future, then you ultimately benefit from the appreciation that occurs. And then you decide to get into general partnership, where you're the one managing the deal, running the deal, and ultimately you have a little bit more upside in a scenario whereby you're able to execute on that business plan. Did you start out strictly in multifamily? And then what was that evolution to the next phase, which is now what you're doing in Puerto Rico?
Absolutely. And I will say that I'm still a believer in the long-term aspects of multifamily. I think that there's, in my opinion, no better proven strategy to generating wealth over the long term is multifamily real estate. I think this country really still has a tremendous need for housing. And so I think that's going to continue to be a good place to put your capital over the long term. Started off, like I said, in condos, then small multifamily, and then eventually the syndications. I think it was just by nature of the fact that I was familiar with, I had rented before. I had seen that there was a need in my home market, and then eventually I had to look further and further away as I built up my comfort level with that. The markets that I could get comfortable with and where I could find partners that could come on and be the local boots on the ground. And so I think that was very, very early thing that I did that others can kind of borrow from is wherever you're investing, if it's your own backyard, that's great. You know that market really well. Or if you're deciding to look further field, outside of your own state, I would say definitely find partners who are experts in that area. As we all are familiar with, real estate is a super specific, it's a hyper local investment class. And so you want to make sure that whether it's you or somebody on your team, somebody is an absolute expert on those markets. So that's what we did. Time went on, in 2022, I believe it was, when the Fed started talking about raising rates. And then, we had a kind of unprecedented run up in their hikes, made the prospects of investing in multifamily a little bit more difficult and made new deals start to pencil a little bit less. And so there was a really wide bid-ask spread. The difference between what buyers were willing to pay and then what sellers were willing to accept became very wide. And so around 2023, 2024, that started to take place. Inflation had, as we're all familiar during that time period, anybody who was investing, inflation had really increased the cost that it takes to run these multifamily projects, whether it was insurance or taxes or labor, materials, everything kind of went up. And so I started to look at it. At that time, I was still generating my W income, still had a capital to put to work myself. And I was like, okay, talk to my network, see who's doing what, and see what's working for those folks. And at that time, it was a really good time to be in hospitality. And so started to look at that. And then kind of over time arrived at, I didn't start off looking at Puerto Rico, but that became an end goal in around 2024.
That's awesome.
How did you go and land on hospitality specifically? Did you run Airbnbs? Did you have other, and are you going to be the operator of that, or did you find a good operator?
Great question. So a friend of mine came to me in 2023 with an opportunity to buy some land in Pennsylvania, Eastern Pennsylvania, a market that I know pretty well just from having grown up in this area and having gone there for growing up on vacation, things like that in the Poconos, it's called. So he came to me. He was already an expert in that area. Again, that same concept with the experts. He had been doing Airbnb for as long as I had been doing term multifamily. And so he was definitely an expert in that asset class. And he came to me with an opportunity to buy some land. He had a partner who was a builder. So we built an A-frame together. And, he is running that. That's all third-party managed. But that gave me definite hands-on experience in terms of what it takes to do development. That was the first kind of development project I was involved with. And then number two, what it takes to run operationally on the short-term rental side. And so that kind of, gave me a sense of comfort in terms of, okay, maybe I can start to look into this myself.
That makes sense. And you kind of alluded to the island of Puerto Rico. So now that's where you've ultimately made your investment. I mean, what are some of the things about the island in particular that kind of attracted you? And, we talked about this offline. Like I'm half Puerto Rican. I've lived in Puerto Rico. I'm very familiar with a lot of parts of the island. I'm kind of curious as to what your thought process was about the investment of the investment potential.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think when I say that I'm investing in hospitality in Puerto Rico, it catches a lot of people like, okay, well, perks some ears up. Like, what's going on there? Certainly a little bit more, I guess you could say, exotic than maybe investing in Louisville and multifamily or something along those lines. So I think it was a gradual thing where us as real estate investors, at least me, I'm sure it's probably the same for a lot of people, is when I go somewhere, right, whether it's vacation or travel, I'm always thinking about real estate. So I'm one of those people where if I travel somewhere, I go to open houses or I, look at what's available in that local market. And so I had started going to Puerto Rico just out of a sense of, enjoyment, really loving the island, loving the people there. Around 2023, I was going back and forth, and it was one of the places that during COVID, it was a little bit earlier. First went there, it was open, and they were welcoming travelers, and so gone there and having again just being enamored by real estate, I was like, okay, there seems to be a lot of opportunity here for housing development. There's a lot of rundown housing, and so I started trying to build my network up in the local market to try to understand how things became that way or how this opportunity came to be. And so I started talking to investors, other local investors, attorneys, brokers, you name it, property managers, and started to learn about some of the intricacies of the market there. And I concluded that there's a really big opportunity. One, I think the thing that jumps out to most people as they start to dig in on the Puerto Rico story is it's part of the U.S. Most people, many people, I should say, don't understand that Puerto Rico is part of the U.S. It's a territory. And so, a lot of the same regulations and things like that apply to Puerto Rico. A lot of the same property rights extend there. Whereas if you were to say, invest in Mexico or somewhere else in Central America or the Caribbean, it's a different animal entirely. It's all different set of laws and things like that. So that gave me some comfort, the fact that it was the U.S. And also, I think the number two thing that attracted me was the number of incentives that are in place, particularly for development and then more specifically for hospitality. Tourism is a sector in Puerto Rico that has not really ever been a huge part of their economy compared to a lot of the Caribbean peers like Jamaica or Dominican Republic. They have much bigger tourism sectors as a relative of their economy. And Puerto Rico, for many reasons, never really had that. And so now the government in the last 10 years or so is sort of playing catch up where they're trying to incentivize more of that tourism because they have all the things that those other islands have. They have beautiful beaches. They have an amazing rainforest there. Actually, the only rainforest in the in Puerto Rico. They have the fact that a lot of people there speak English. Yeah, all of those things make it really attractive. And so now the government is putting a lot of incentives in place for developers like to come there and to build to provide housing for people who want to travel there.
Okay, you have just totally made me excited about this market, and I need to look into it. I can't wait to hear the rest of your story here.
For sure. Yeah. So there are a number of different incentives in place. Um, one of them that exists, for example, which blew my mind when I first heard about it, and I was like, okay, is this real? For hospitality, if you apply for something called Act 60, which Act 60 is a really a body of laws, not just in hospitality, but part of that legislation is basically providing hospitality development incentive in the form of tax credits. So in this case, it provides 40% back in tax credits for development of hospitality assets, so hotels. Also, breakfast, smaller bed and breakfasts. That covers your purchase price, your construction costs, as well as your first year of operation. So all of those numbers combined, the government is saying to you, if you're able to do this, and you have to check certain boxes, we'll give you a 40% of that total figure back in the form of a tax credit.
And can that be used, and maybe we'll dive into this once you start talking about the project, like, can that be used as part of your capital stack when you're funding the deal, or is that something that happens post that's not really taken into consideration?
It happens post. You will still have to come up with the capital yourself, and that's kind of the thing that is a big hurdle on the island. Is the capital market is not as deep as it is in, say, the States. Aren't as many banks there, commercial banks that are willing to lend on, development or even commercial real estate in general. And so that's the biggest hurdle for folks who are getting started in Puerto Rico. Is a lot of these deals happen via just cash, as it often happens throughout the developing world as well. A lot of these are purchase cash, and then the actual construction costs are cash as well. But great about it is banks are willing to lend against that tax credit. So if you get this project up and it's viable, and you're able to find a bank to secure financing, they'll actually take that credit against the that they're able to provide you.
Yeah, no, that's great. That helps a lot in that process. So so you talked a little bit about your interest, just natural interest in Puerto Rico, just from having gone there and experiencing the culture and everything about it, and you just enjoyed it as an island. But then you kind of talked a little bit about the fact that you're, as a real estate person, you're constantly looking for those types of opportunities. What was the impetus for taking on this particular project with this building? Like, what was I guess, how did you get to that point?
That's a great question. So I've been looking at a number of different projects over the course of probably a year and a half, and passing on a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff just didn't make sense. One thing that's a little bit unique to Puerto Rico, and I imagine much of the Caribbean, there's not as efficient of a market, very fragmented. Thing like above 90% of all transactions happen off market. So for all intents and purposes, the MLS, there is an MLS, but it's really not as widespread in its use here in the States. So this was an off-market opportunity that came to us through a local relationship that I had built. So it was an owner of a hotel in this particular neighborhood that I had built up a friendship with. Actually stayed at his hotel. That's how kind of the relationship started. He was aware of his neighbor who was selling their property. He actually was like, "Hey, if you want to take a look at this, we can tour it together." This was my idea for this project, and happy to kind of assist in that introduction. And so went down there with a couple of partners, walked the property, and we decided to kind of move forward. And it was a very old school kind of interaction with the seller where we walked the property. We had run the numbers already, and we went into, in his case, he has a bodega that he actually still runs to this day. So like a true mom and pop. And we kind of told him what our vision was for the project, and how we thought it would improve the community, and what, course we thought it would bring. And then we were able to come to terms and actually shook hands, and from there.
That's awesome. I mean, that's a unique story. Did you? So it was a truly off market. I know in Puerto Rico there's this thing called clasificados online, which a lot of people use as far as like just selling anything you can imagine. So I don't know. Is that something that you were looking online periodically to see?
Totally. Clasificados is, that's pretty much the say almost like Craigslist.
Yeah.
Island.
Literally, I mean, it's like you could find anything for sale on Clasificados online. Everyone goes to it.
And they have, bandit signs posted everywhere throughout the island for Clasificados.
Mm-hmm.
So everybody uses it, from, buying a lawnmower to, like we're seeing here, like housing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I had been combing through that. I had been combing through Facebook Marketplace. I had been using, the MLS that does exist there, as well as talking to people in my network. One thing that I always try to do when I'm looking at, projects in a new geography is I try to meet other investors in that local market.
Hey, can we chat for a second? Since you're listening to this podcast, you're already thinking like a developer. You see the potential in your community, and you're ready to do more than just watch from the sidelines. That's exactly why we created the Local Developer Vault. It's a free resource full of tools, templates, and trainings to help you take action. And here's the best part. When you sign up, you'll also get access to our local real estate developer community. It's full of people just like you who are making real things happen in their neighborhoods. So don't just listen to the stories. Become the next one that we spotlight on our show. The link in the show notes to unlock the vault and join our movement.
Sense is that, while you can hear story from local brokers, which is a great source of information, you can hear the story from property managers, from any group of people. I think investors, knowing other investors in that market is really invaluable, because you can kind of get the unadulterated, the good, the bad, the ugly, and there's usually no hidden agenda there. That's one of the things I try to do for the island as well. And so having built those relationships, this deal came about through one of those.
That's awesome.
Right on. And then what was the size of this deal? Like how many rooms, and is it on the beach, or where is it located?
So it's in San Juan. It's in the capital city, which is where most of the tourism actually flies into. There are two other smaller airports, but I think 90% of the air traffic comes into the capital there, as well as all the cruises most of the cruises come into San Juan. The original just was $450. We had to pay a finder's fee, so I think our all-in with closing costs and everything was around $550 purchase price. We ended up putting in $600-ish. We're all in around 1.1, and that was based on the fact that what we got was essentially a shell. There was a building there, but we had to redo all the plumbing, all the electrical, roof, parking lot, all of the interior renovation as well. It was quite a big value add. So I would say, it wasn't a pure development, but it was definitely a redevelopment play there.
Definitely. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that. So you were able to come to terms on the property. You ultimately took possession. What was the next phase of the process? Like, how did you leverage your relationships to find the construction professionals that you started to work with? And then maybe we can even touch on some of the challenges you all faced post close.
Sure. So our vision was to create a 16-room boutique hotel. There were already some partitions in this building, so we kind of had already kind of the natural floor plan there. We changed a few things, but ultimately we were able to get 16 rooms out of it. They're varying in size, basically comparable to a lot of the hotel type of studios that you would get most major hotels. In terms of how we got started, one of the things that I believe in is I think that we all have our own proclivities, our own individual zones of genius. So for me, I know my area, and I definitely know a lot of my areas that I'm not an expert in. And so I try to find people to add to the team that can fill in those spots, whether it be partners or vendors that we can work with. And so one of the things that we did early on was we hired a designer. In hospitality, it matters, I would say, even to a greater extent than long-term multifamily. Actual layouts, the finishes that you put into these units. People are coming there for a couple of days and they want to be really, really comfortable. And so you want to make sure that you're able to present them with something that they're not getting at home. And that's not just clean and comfortable and safe, but has a real look and feel to it. It's going to make them choose your place over any other term rental or hotel or Airbnb that's out there. And so we hired somebody that I had in my network. The wife of a friend who's also in hospitality, and they do some hospitality up here in the Northeast together. And so I was familiar with what their projects look like. And, so we formed that partnership. From there, it was a number of steps in terms of finding the right contractor. And I relied on those same people within my network that I had built. So in this case, there was a very experienced investor on the island that's very public about what he's doing. And I had built a good relationship with him. And I asked him, hey, if you were me, if you were starting off on the island, you're comfortable, a lot of this stuff, but having the right GC, you're starting off, who would you work with? And so he gave me a number of references. And I think that's another really good tidbit for people who are investing in new geography. Again, hand in hand with having those other investor contacts, asking them for referrals. They've already done all the vetting. learned the hard way who the good and not so good folks are to work with. And so, thankfully it all worked out. And it's actually the same GC that we're working with now on other projects together. That was it. So it was getting the designer, getting the GC on board, having our vision really ironed out in terms of what we're looking to do, putting in place a plan. Everything that you hear about investing in, I guess to a large degree, a lot of the Caribbean in general is island time. People are on the island time. Things take slow, they take longer. People are not as I would say urgent as we're used to in the States. Hopefully that wasn't our experience. We had a GC who was really on it. He had his guys there, 6, sometimes 7 days a week, and we were able to bring this project to fruition in about 8 months, which is 2 months a little bit longer than we thought, but still, people who are familiar with the island, they're like, wow, it's really amazing what you're able to get done in that time.
That's phenomenal. You talked about some of the players on your team. Are you the sole general partner of this, and you brought in consultants for that, or how did you structure your partnerships?
So we have a 3-partner group or team on this project. So I have 2 other partners, one based on the island. I'm soon going to be based on the island, and then we have another person who's based here in the Northeast. And so we kind of approached it as a joint venture. The way that we structured it, because it wasn't all of our own capital, we raised private debt to close on the purchase and then do the renovations, as well as brought a bunch of our own equity to the table. And so we were able to kind of approach it that way.
That's awesome. So the thought process there behind it is that you had your own capital that you kicked in the deal, and then you had private debt, which would be just going to someone saying, hey, I'll give you 12% on your money for this whole period, because in theory what the logic is that you buy the building, perform the renovations, and then you refinance using the credits that you've accrued and whatever other equity that you have within the deal. So ultimately, you should be in a position at year 1, at the end of the year, to be able to get out the private debt. Now you guys are full owners of that property. Is that correct?
Exactly the approach. Yeah. So I think for a lot of folks, they were new to Puerto Rico, and they were maybe even some of my investors were new to hospitality, because all the projects I had ever brought them in the past were long-term multifamily. And so there was a lot of education that went on behind the scenes. I think once they got comfortable with the fact that they would, this was debt, so they're a little bit more secured in terms of the capital stack relative to equity. They would have a lien against the property. They were basically our bank, and we had the legal documents up that way by our attorney. They got comfortable with that, and they got comfortable with the amount of the capital that we were actually putting in the deal, the fact that we had so much skin in the game. A lot of these people had been repeat investors with us. So we also offered a few sweeteners as well, like, they can bring their family down and stay with us. So once they got comfortable with all that stuff, they were, hopefully we were able to raise the capital.
That makes a ton of sense. Yeah. So as far as the banking and the debt portion, did you guys get into a stabilized loan, and does that work how we're used to in the States, or is it a little bit different?
Great question. So we're working on that process now. We've been up and running. This is our 3rd month of operations, and I'm happy to say that we're exceeding our expectations, quite a wide margin. I'm happy about that. We're right now interviewing a few of the local banks, including actually contact Raphael that you and I have in contact. And so we're hoping that in the next 3 to 6 months, we'll be able to secure that refinance, pay back our investors, and kind of move forward from there. In terms of the actual debt, yeah, it works in much the same way as debt would from a local bank or even a national bank here in the States. There are 3 main lenders on the island. It's not as deep as said of a capital market, but there are a ton of also credit unions on the bank. If you have those relationships, or you know somebody that has those relationships, that's an opportunity as well. A lot of the same terms and a little bit higher of a rate than you would get in the States, but otherwise all the same.
And then did you guys do any, since it is hospitality, did you do any type of social media and building a brand around that?
Yeah, that's a great point. So I think marketing is super key in hospitality relative to maybe long-term rentals. You can build the nicest hotel, the nicest, offering that in the market, but if people don't know about you, then it really doesn't matter. And so we had a friend actually another contact that I had grown, who's an expert in social media, and he came in and did some of our early campaigns. We're now transitioning into a different person to kind of things fresh every week, kind of start posting and things like that. We're able to generate a lot of interest just off of that initially. I was happy about. Now it's getting to the point where we're really starting to build up our direct bookings. is really
Nice.
the key. And that's the goal for a lot of hospitality operators, not have to work through a lot of the OTAs, the online travel agencies like Airbnb, Expedia. Because what happens is those are all middlemen. And so essentially they control the relationship between the guests and you. And so, it's not always fun dealing with them. It's not always as profitable dealing with them as they take a cut for that service. And so that's what we're kind of focused on right now is building up that direct booking pipeline where we can offer people a better rate than they would get on the OTAs, and we're able to control that relationship.
That's awesome. So, kind of back to the process of getting the building up and running. What were some of the challenges that you faced? Because having lived on the island, I actually was on I don't know if you're familiar with Suri, so I was on the Suri project to help replace the financial software system for the island for the couple of years there, and so I got a little bit more familiar, not necessarily on the building side of the permitting process or anything like that, but I did get familiarized with the way things work over there as far as permitting and really just the things that go on within the local government. So maybe talk a little bit about that process, like getting the permits you needed, trying to navigate that process, and then ultimately, what were some of the challenges on the actual construction phase, which was obviously a bit more, I'm sure, intensive as you start doing adaptive reuse projects.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's interesting to hear that you worked as part of the Sorry project. We actually use a lot of, obviously we're communicating with them fairly often, and we use their maps and things like that when we were first acquiring the property to make sure that everything was copacetic. And but so from there, from the very initiative, we basically, once we onboarded our GC, we tried to get up to speed on what the permitting process was. And thankfully, he had done a ton of projects, bigger projects, so he was very used to the whole permitting project process, and he had a ton of contacts there locally. It always helps, no matter you're investing, is having contacts at the building department or whatever it is in your local jurisdiction. So he was able to take a lot of that on. That's something that's in Puerto Rico. It's called a permiso único. Basically, I guess you could say like a single permit that covers a lot of different things for commercial property. So it is a painstaking process, but thankfully it's not a million different permits that you have to get at times. So we were able to get that done fairly early in the project, have the inspectors out and give it the okay and so on. Also, we're working with the Department of Tourism, which I think helped a lot. I mentioned the government there is very supportive of hospitality projects, and so by getting them in the fold early on, actually even before we had this project, we were having meetings with them. They were able to kind of push some things along as well. So I would say working with those local authorities, local agencies, and trying to make them your friends to the extent possible always makes your life a little bit easier. In terms of some of the challenges to the construction, there were a lot. I wasn't as involved with the construction. Thankfully, one of my partners took that on and owned that, and he was on site much more often, time with us and things like that as needed. Some of the early issues that I was involved with were just the sheer logistics of getting materials. A lot of this stuff we could buy on island, thankfully, but a lot of stuff also just wasn't available on island. So we had to try to find it either in the States or wherever it was coming from. And then it would start a complex process of importing. Some of those shipments unfortunately got held up. And so we had to learn basically from scratch how this process works with the help of our attorney. Thankfully, like I said earlier, our team was really experienced, whereas this was our first hospitality project on the island. We had a lot of people holding our hands at every step of the way, saying, okay, this is how you prepare for that. This is how you can mitigate the issues once they do pop up. And so we were able to ultimately manage it. Going forward, I think we know a lot from, done this project that will help save us time in the future. From buying on island, who the right suppliers are, things like that, and then avoiding those issues with the holdups. So the materials acquisition, that was one part, and the logistics. Another part was just labor. On the island, there's just not as plentiful of skilled labor as there is in the States, where if you have a project, you have any number of different GCs that are willing to quote on stuff and are consistent, actually show up. We had is there where keep in mind the timeline of this coincided with administration coming in, and so a lot of the ICE raids and things like that really impacted the island. Under Puerto Rico, many people don't know this, but there's quite an influx of Dominicans that come to the island looking for work, looking for opportunities, and that's kind of their first waypoint times to the States. And so there were a number of people at that time that were really worried about being taken by ICE and kind of deported and things like that. Thankfully, our crews weren't as affected by this. We had maybe a few people that didn't show up on a day-to-day basis because they were afraid, even though they were legitimate, they were just afraid of being caught up in this whole wide net of deportations. And so we had a little bit of slowdown of work on that, but we were able to figure it out. We were able to kind of pivot, thankfully, with the help of our GC. Those were the biggest issues, was materials and labor, which I guess that's the game in construction.
Yeah. Kristi's familiar with that for sure.
Oh, yes. I've done tons of construction projects, and just getting people to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Getting people to do what they say they're going to do. I mean, that seems like it should be easy, but it's not. Yeah. So as you guys kind of hit your different challenges and roadblocks, which every project's going to have it, where you get that, what was your driving motivator, or what were the things that you guys would do to stay motivated through the tough times and the unknowns and the uncertainty of working there?
I think for me, it comes back to why. Why are you doing this? I mean, obviously, we're all in business to make money, and that matters a lot. But also, I try to use as my North Star every project. I try to use a couple of other motivators besides money. It's, what improvement or what vision we had for this project in terms of the local community. Been there for a number of months prior. I was very familiar with the local market and knew what a difference this project could make in this, 1 or 2 block radius in terms of jobs and commerce and things like that. So I tried to use that as, okay, this is going to make a real difference for people there. So frankly, I think a really big motivator is the fact that we had outside investors in this project. And I think there's no stronger motivator than having somebody else's money, your own deal. Obviously, I don't want to lose my own money, but it's even for sacrosanct, it's even a higher level of care that you have for other people's money. So, that was a really strong motivator of just wanting to see this project come to fruition. So in the days where it got really hard, I just kind of fell back on, okay, I think this is going to make a really positive impact on the community. Other people's money are behind this. And so I got to make sure that I do everything within my power to safeguard the responsibility that I have with that.
Yeah, that's a great attitude to have, because I know that that's something that people say, but in reality, it's not always put in practice. And I think that's an important thing to say, is that at the end of the day, if you have other people's money, you're a fiduciary to that person, and you got to make sure that you're ultimately doing what's right by them. So that's great. So you've gone through, so let's try to do another step back just to kind of get a feel for the next phase of the process. So obviously you got through the construction phase, you had a phenomenal GC, it seems like. You had a partner who understood the construction process as well, that was able to be on site and provide feedback as to what this could look like. Once you guys got to the point where now your guys are ready to open, I think another challenge with hospitality is the high touch points of it just being it's not like a multifamily property where you lease out the space and, if you get a call because of a toilet or whatever, it's every periodic, versus hospitality where you're constantly having to touch that unit and make sure that it's getting turned over, and if there's any issues that they're addressed immediately. So how have you guys been able to manage that and to ensure that people want to come back and stay at your location?
But yeah, I think the operations piece is the most crucial piece of hospitality. I mean, again, you can have a great product, but if people have a bad experience or a bad impression of it, they're not going to come back. And so that comes with a lot of care and a lot of attention to detail, a lot of processes and automation and things like that. So what we tried to do very early on was say, okay, what can we control for in terms of the guest experience? What technology can we leverage? Who can we leverage? Can we add somebody to our team that can manage this? In our case, we had a general manager start with us very early on in the process. Now we have a virtual GM. We've gotten to the point where now we have a virtual GM that's able to manage a lot of the operations from afar with help of the cleaners that are there every day. Yeah, to answer the question, I think it starts with the design phase. One of the things we did was we did the contactless check-ins. So we're able to send guests codes that are able to check themselves in. We have a gate that provides access to our parking lot. We're always available via phone and chat if there is a guest that has an issue. And we're very responsive. I mean, our response time is within 5 minutes with guests. So we have around the clock coverage that way. And it also takes, you're going to plan for a lot of this stuff, and you're going to hopefully mitigate a lot of the headaches before they become headaches. but also you're going to have to think on your feet and in the problem solving business, as we talked about before the interview. So you're going to have to think on your feet and develop processes as you go as well. You can't think of all the possible different situations that are going to pop up in hospitality. So, we've been able to be really adaptable, and with the help of our GM, our cleaners, and a number of other kind of service vendors that we've brought on board and technology that we've brought on board, we've been able to kind of, thankfully, our ratings really high and keep guests, for the most part, really happy. Time that we encounter something new, we try to think about, okay, the problem is acceptable one time, but what's absolutely unacceptable, in my opinion, is to allow the same thing to repeat. And so we try to come up with long-term solutions so that we can avoid it ever happening to a guest again.
Definitely. And
so true.
Is that a
you
third
had
party?
me laughing through this because I run a couple Airbnb. I run Airbnbs or have them in Nevada, Ohio, and Florida, and you definitely dial things in, like, here's exactly how we communicate, automated messages, here's how quickly we'll respond to the custom one-offs, here's a house manual that gives you, hopefully answers every question you have, but sometimes just getting them to open the link is hard. And then you just have the people are people, and they're going to be special, and sometimes you really question humanity. But then you remember that you are here to improve the community that you're offering it in. You're showcasing an area that they're choosing to come travel to. So you do want it to make it a good experience for them. And ultimately, so that kind of leads in. So in Tahoe, we have a ton of international travelers. What do you see as your common tourist base in it? Are there any communication issues? And then tying into that with the 24/7 response time, are you leveraging virtual assistants?
Great question. So we're mixed in terms of the travelers that we accommodate. There are a lot of people from the States go there. A lot of them have either family. We have a large Puerto Rican population in the U.S., obviously, and those people often go back, as Raphael was mentioning, his own experience. So that's really great, and provide accommodations for a lot of those folks. And there are a lot of people that also are just now discovering Puerto Rico. COVID, like I was saying earlier, Puerto Rico was one of the places that you could go. You don't need a visa, or welcoming travelers with open arms. And so since then, the growth of tourism has really taken off. And so a lot of our folks are just mainlanders that are coming to the island. Yeah, we do have a portion of people. I don't know what the ratio is, but we do have a pretty large portion of people who are international travelers. Particularly right now, Europeans kind of surprise me. We get a lot of English-speaking Europeans. With the dollar being a little bit weaker, it probably helps their travel plans. There are a lot of direct flights from Spain actually to Puerto Rico. Mm-hmm. That's been an interesting one. As far as language barriers, I wouldn't say that's been an issue. Thankfully, everybody on our team speaks Spanish and English. There's kind of an even mix there amongst travelers. Some people respond in Spanish, some people in English, but either way, we're able to manage it.
That's awesome. And do you have someone on site? Like, I was curious about the operational piece. Like, do you have someone on site that you have as a GM that kind of manages the whole process, and then maybe front desk attendants or anything like that, or how does that work?
Great question. I'm sorry I missed this earlier, responding to that question. We have 3 cleaners. We have my one partner that lives locally. We step in as needed. Cleaners, I should say, are trained on a lot of the day-to-day stuff. So if somebody has a problem with a remote or needs a refresh on their room and needs, whatever they need some guidance, they're well trained in terms of responding to those things. I have a virtual general manager who's based in Venezuela. She speaks both English and Spanish and is kind of running the day-to-day. She's full-time. And also, soon enough, I'll be living locally as well. We don't have necessarily somebody at the front desk right now. Thank God, we haven't really needed that yet. Our cleaners do live locally. If there ever is an emergency, whatever the case may be, they're able to kind of run over there. And also have a number of friends and other local investors that we're able to kind of leverage a handyman and those types of relationships from as well.
That's awesome. Well, it looks like you've thought through a lot of the stuff, which is great. I mean, obviously that showcases that you've thought through the process and you ultimately were able to deliver something that seems to be functional, and hopefully you guys are able to, refinance out and then, go from there. But so what's the future look like? What are some of the, I guess, future projects you're looking at, or where do you see this going from here?
So as I mentioned, I'm going to be moving to the island myself. Really love it there. And so going to be dedicating myself part-time to, building up my state presence there. I'm going to do a lot more. I mean, hospitality has been great, and I definitely would do future hospitality projects. I think I need a little bit of a break because this last 12 months has been kind of a sprint. It's been great. I've been drinking from a fire hose, but I think I need probably maybe, I don't know, 6 months to kind of come back to my next hospitality project. In terms of longer term, I would like to be a small part of helping solve a problem on the island, which is long-term housing. Mm-hmm. There is a real need, as there is in the States, there's a real need for long-term housing and affordable long-term housing. A couple of other investors that are starting to do this as well, but there's a lot of housing stock that's in disrepair that needs to be brought online, and I think those opportunities exist. So I'd like to basically put my efforts behind trying to find some projects where I can take something that's not in use currently and bring it back to life and do flips that way. That's where me and a few other partners are kind of focusing our efforts for the near term.
That's awesome. That's great. And to your point, it's sorely needed. I mean, Hurricane Maria, there's a lot of buildings still that are in a state of disrepair that were greatly affected by the hurricane. I was actually on the island when the hurricane happened, and it was kind of nuts. I mean, it was a pretty unique experience to say the least. So,
bless you. Yeah, I can only imagine. I've seen, like you said, some of the housing is still in the shape that it was back when that happened. So I can only imagine living through that. It speaks to the resilience of the Puerto Rican people. That's one thing that I would say that I really appreciate about the Puerto Rican culture, is that they have a real sense of community, really support one another. They've through a lot throughout their history. And so, they really rely on each other. And there's that the entire island is one big community. I mean, from the moment that you fly into Puerto Rico and people touch down on the ground, there's usually a lot of clapping and things like that. So that's the beginning of your experiences, just being welcomed by these people. And so I'm definitely want to play a positive role in that, in that ecosystem.
God bless you, man. That's great. That's good to hear. And I know the island definitely needs it, and I'm looking forward to hopefully interacting in the future too, because I know that's one of my goals eventually, is to try to give back in some way to the island. So hopefully we can cross paths in the future as well.
That'd be awesome. Yeah, looking forward to that.
You have now potentially made me an investor and down there as well. And it's like we were saying offline, I most likely will be moving to one of the islands in the Caribbean. I'm like, maybe it's actually Puerto Rico. I don't know, but I'll be doing more research now.
Nice. Well, anytime, you're always welcome. Just give me a holler and we'll host you.
That's phenomenal. So you've got this project. You're really focusing on the community-driven aspect. I love how you've gathered the locals and the team and the affordable housing. I mean, this is incredible. So are you pausing or just not continuing any future stuff in the States, and it's all focused down there, or how are you juggling that?
So I mentioned that I'm going to be, spending a lot of my time focused on stuff on the island. We'll also be kind of taking on a new role with a equity firm based in New York City, in my own backyard where I grew up, and it's a good friend of mine that started this firm, and they're growing really quickly. And all of their projects for the time being are focused in States. So they're doing a lot of different really interesting stuff. So I'll kind of have one foot in the island stuff and then one foot in the mainland, which will keep things a little bit interesting. I'll continue to kind of work on projects through that private equity fund here in the U.S.
That's awesome. Well, Marc, thanks for your time. I always enjoy speaking with you. It's been a little while since we've had a chance to connect, but it was very insightful, this particular conversation. So one thing I wanted to ask is, if people want to learn more about you, maybe even connect with you, if they're looking to invest on the island, what's the best way for them to do that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm an open book. I always say that, if I've gotten anywhere in life, it's by standing on the shoulders of giants, which, that I definitely try to embody. A lot of people helped me along early on in my journey, and so I want to try to pay that forward. I don't have all the answers, but maybe I can point you in the right direction as far as somebody or something that does. People can reach out to me on my Instagram, I would say, is a really good spot to start. Marc, MARC _Weisi, WEISI. They can email me too at Marc, MARC @investwithmaple.com. And I'm always happy to make time and speak with them.
That's awesome. Yeah, and we'll make sure to include that in the show notes. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, it'll be in the description. If you guys are listening to this in podcast format, again, it'll be in the description as well. So, well, Marc, thank you so much for your time. I know Kristi and I got a lot out of it, and I know that our audience will as well. If you guys are watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. It makes a huge impact on our ability to reach a broader audience, and we greatly appreciate the support. Along with that, if you guys are watching this in a podcast format, whether that's Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please, please, please leave a 5-star review. It does make a huge impact on our ability to reach a broader audience, so then we can continue to spread the message and hopefully get more people inspired to take on their first commercial real estate development project. So thanks again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you all next time.